The Lumina Tech Conference was Silicon Valley's premier event, where billionaires mingled with startup founders and tech journalists fought for exclusive scoops. Michael stood on the main stage, his confidence radiating through the massive LED screens behind him. Claire sat in the front row, her Hermes scarf, Sarah's old signature gift, wrapped around her neck like a victory flag. Today, Michael announced to the packed auditorium, Lumina presents Project Oracle, the world's first quantum-enhanced AI for predictive market analysis. In Diana's garage command center, Sarah watched the live stream surrounded by monitors. Marcus's fingers flew across keyboards, coordinating with their team of hackers. Thomas Chen had his phone ready, waiting to alert his network of traders. Now Sarah commanded. The attack was symphonic in its precision. As Michael clicked to start his demo, the screens behind him flickered. Instead of Project Oracle's sleek interface, the audience watched security camera footage from 3 years ago. Michael in his office, laughing with Claire as they reviewed stolen code from Raj Patel's startup. "What you're seeing," a modulated voice announced through the conference's hijacked sound system, "is the real origin of Project Oracle." Michael froze on stage, his practiced smile cracking. Claire stood up, already reaching for her phone. But it was too late. Every tech journalist in attendance received a detailed dossier, original patents, proof of theft, and testimonies from destroyed innovators. "The stock is falling," Thomas reported, watching trading screens. "They've halted trading on the NYC." On screen, security guards rushed to clear the auditorium as reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Zhang, is it true you stole this technology? Mrs. Zhang, did you help frame Sarah Chen to cover up corporate theft?" Sarah watched Claire's face pale as her phone exploded with messages. The carefully crafted facade was cracking, but this was just the beginning. "Second wave," Sarah nodded to Marcus. Across social media, victims began sharing their stories. Lisa Martinez's viral Twitter thread detailed how Michael stole her life's work. James Chen's LinkedIn post exposed the forced buyout that cost him everything. Each story came with documentation, each accusation backed by irrefutable proof. "SEC is announcing an investigation," Diana reported, hanging up her phone. "And 3 major shareholders are calling for an emergency board meeting." Sarah stood up, straightening her jacket. "Jenny's evidence?" "Secured and authenticated," Marcus confirmed. "Ready for the FBI whenever you give the word." On screen, Michael was being hustled off stage by security as journalists swarmed. Claire had disappeared completely. Their perfect world was unraveling in real time, broadcast live to millions. "Should we release the personal files?" Marcus asked, fingers hovering over his keyboard. Sarah shook her head. "No, we're not them. This isn't about humiliation. It's about justice." She watched as the stock price ticked lower. Besides, they've done enough damage to themselves. Now everyone sees who they really are. Diana squeezed her shoulder, ready for phase 2. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the chaos they'd unleashed. "They taught me well," she said quietly. "Never throw all your punches in the first round." The federal courthouse hadn't changed since Sarah's own trial 3 years ago. Same marble steps, same imposing columns, same swarm of reporters. But this time, she wasn't the one in handcuffs. From her position in the back row of the courtroom, she watched Michael and Claire's arraignment with clinical detachment. 57 counts of patent fraud, conspiracy, and securities violations, the prosecutor announced. The same prosecutor who'd once called Sarah a threat to corporate integrity now wielded her evidence like a sword. Jenny's recordings played in crystal clear quality, showing Michael and Claire plotting their schemes. Claire's perfectly maintained composure cracked when the prosecutor detailed their elaborate plan to frame Sarah. Ms. Zhang, formerly Ms. Watson, not only assisted in stealing intellectual property, but orchestrated the fraudulent evidence that sent an innocent woman to prison. Michael's expensive defense attorney looked lost. Every attempt to discredit the evidence led to more damning revelations. Sarah had learned from her own trial. Every document was authenticated, every witness bulletproof, every digital trail verified by multiple experts. During a recess, Claire tried to catch Sarah's eye, her face a mask of desperate pleading. Sarah simply opened her laptop and continued working on her next case, a whistleblower from a different tech company who'd reached out after seeing Michael's downfall. The board has voted to remove them both, Thomas whispered, sliding into the seat beside her. Stock's down 60% since the conference. The company won't survive this. But Sarah wasn't watching the legal proceedings anymore. Her attention was on the victims filling the courtroom. Lisa Martinez, now working on a new startup backed by ethical investors. James Chen, his quantum computing patents restored. Raj Patel, teaching coding to underprivileged kids while rebuilding his security firm. Your disbarment has been officially reversed, Diana announced quietly, joining them. The Bar Association's Ethics Committee reviewed everything. They're calling it a gross miscarriage of justice. Sarah nodded, but her victory felt different than she'd imagined. Not the burning satisfaction she'd expected, but something cooler and cleaner. The truth, finally exposed, was justice enough. The judge returned, her face stern. Bail is denied for both defendants. Given the flight risk and the severity of charges, Michael stood up suddenly, his expensive suit wrinkled from custody. Sarah, his voice cracked. Please, we can make a deal. I'll confess to everything, give you whatever you want. Sit down, Mr. Zhang, the judge ordered sharply. Sarah packed her laptop, standing quietly. She straightened her red blazer, the same one from her arrest, and walked toward the exit. At the doorway, she paused, turning back to face her former husband and best friend. I don't want anything from you, she said clearly, her voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. The truth wants nothing from lies. She stepped into the sunlight, where reporters waited with cameras and questions. But Sarah Chen, reborn from the ashes of betrayal, had already given them the biggest story they'd ever need. Justice served in broad daylight, for all the world to see. Lucky's diner smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams. Sarah had mastered the art of becoming invisible during her morning shifts. Head down, smile fixed, name tag slightly askew. The regulars had stopped whispering about the disgraced lawyer after the first month, finding fresher scandals to dissect over their eggs Benedict. She'd learned to tune out the business news playing on the ancient TV, especially when it mentioned Michael's rising tech empire. That morning, her hands shook more than usual. The newspaper headlines had announced Claire's promotion to general counsel at Michael's company, complete with a photo of them together at some charity gala. The coffee pot felt heavier than normal as she approached table 7, where an elderly Asian woman sat reviewing case files. The spill happened in slow motion. Coffee cascaded over the woman's newspaper, seeping into the business section when Michael's smirking face dissolved into brown stains. Shit, Sarah muttered, then immediately flushed. 2 years ago, she would have never sworn in public. 2 years ago, she'd been wearing Louboutins, not orthopedic shoes with coffee stains. Perfect aim, the woman said, her voice carrying the sharp wit of someone used to commanding courtrooms. You just destroyed the most irritating article I've read all morning. She looked up, and Sarah felt herself being assessed with the precision of a seasoned judge. Diana Wang. She introduced herself, and you're Sarah Chen. I presided over the Thompson insider trading case in '98. Your analysis of it during your Harvard Law Review days was impressive. Sarah's practiced smile cracked. No one had mentioned her academic work in years. That was a lifetime ago, she managed, trying to mop up the coffee with trembling hands. No, Diana corrected, closing her leather portfolio. That was *U*, still is. Pull up a chair, Sarah. My treat. I have a proposition that might interest you. I have tables too. They can wait. Tell me, what do you know about digital forensics? Over the next hour, as the morning rush ebbed and flowed around them, Diana outlined a world Sarah had never considered. A world where evidence could be traced through digital fingerprints, where paper trails led to encrypted servers, where justice wasn't always served in courtrooms. Your ex-husband's company, Diana said, sliding across a USB drive, has some interesting patterns in their patent applications. Patterns that remind me of a case I saw before retirement. One that never sat right with me. Sarah stared at the drive, her heart pounding. Why are you showing me this? Diana's smile carried decades of courtroom victories. Because sometimes, Sarah, rock bottom is just the foundation for something stronger. The law isn't just about courtrooms and precedents. It's about justice. And justice, well, justice sometimes needs a different approach. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt something stir inside her, not the familiar burn of humiliation, but the steady flame of purpose. She pocketed the drive, her waitress smile replaced by something sharper. Tell me more. Diana's garage-turned-office looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream. Monitors lined the walls, their screens filled with code that once would have been meaningless to Sarah. Now, after 3 months of intensive training with Marcus, Diana's son, she could read the digital breadcrumbs of corporate theft like a familiar language. You're a natural, Marcus commented, watching Sarah trace a pattern's history through buried server logs. His fingers flew across the keyboard, teaching her how to peel back layers of digital deception. Most lawyers take years to grasp this stuff. Most lawyers haven't lost everything, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. She traded her waitress uniform for hoodies and jeans, her manicured nails now practical and short. Each keystroke brought her closer to understanding how thoroughly Michael and Claire had played her. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m., when the rest of Queens slept. Sarah discovered a pattern in Michael's company's patent filings. Serial numbers that linked back to defunct startups. Innovations that mysteriously appeared right after their original creators went bankrupt. She cross-referenced the dates with court records, finding a graveyard of small tech companies buried under impossible legal fees and suspicious audit findings. Look at this, she called to Diana, who was reviewing old case files. Every time Michael's company launches a revolutionary new product, there's a trail of destroyed lives behind it. These aren't just patents they're stealing, they're dreams. Diana moved closer, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and each victim signed an NDA, legally gagged from speaking out. Clever. Evil, but clever. Sarah pulled up another screen, this one showing a complex web of shell companies. Claire's signature is on everything. She's not just his wife now. She's the architect of their legal fortress. She learned from watching me use my own techniques against others. The pieces were falling into place. Sarah had created a secure server, encrypted with protocols Marcus had taught her, filled with evidence. Companies gutted, innovations stolen, lives ruined, all leading back to Michael and Claire's empire. But it wasn't enough to just gather evidence. She needed allies. There's someone you should meet, Diana said, sliding across a business card. Remember Thomas Chen from the Silicon Valley insider trading cases? He's been watching Michael's company too. As a short seller, he stands to profit if they fall. Sarah studied the card, remembering the legendary investor known for exposing corporate fraud. Will he help? He's been waiting for someone with inside knowledge. Diana smiled. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Sarah nodded, her mind already mapping out the next steps. She'd learned that revenge, like justice, required patience and precision. Michael and Claire had spent years building their empire on stolen dreams. She would spend years dismantling it, piece by piece. One more thing, Marcus called out, pointing to his screen. I found something interesting in Claire's private emails. Seems like not everyone in their company is happy with the new power couple. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Chess had always been her favorite game. Now, finally, she was learning to play it in 3 dimensions. The encrypted message arrived at midnight. I have what you need, but meeting me puts my family at risk. Jenny Wu, Michael's former executive assistant, had finally responded to Sarah's careful outreach. After 3 weeks of digital dead drops and secure communications, she'd agreed to talk. They met in the basement of a Chinese church in Flushing, where elderly women practiced Tai Chi in the early morning darkness. Jenny looked smaller than Sarah remembered, her designer clothes replaced by an oversized sweater that seemed to swallow her whole. They threatened to report my parents to immigration, Jenny whispered, her hands clutching a hard drive. Michael knows their papers aren't perfect. But I kept everything. Her eyes darted around the room. Every meeting, Every conversation, every file they made me falsify. Sarah reviewed the contents that night in Diana's garage, Marcus ensuring their security systems were airtight. The evidence was damning. Video recordings of Michael and Claire planning their corporate raids, telephone conversations with scared inventors, emails discussing Sarah's framing as casually as lunch plans. They never suspected Jenny, Sarah murmured, watching a video of Michael rehearsing his testimony against her. They were too busy looking down on her to realize she could see everything. Thomas Chen, the short seller Diana had connected her with, examined the financial records with growing excitement. "This is better than we hoped," he said, his Wall Street polish at odds with Diana's cluttered garage. "Their entire tech empire is built on intellectual theft. When this breaks, the SEC will have a field day." But it was Diana who asked the crucial question. "Are you sure you want to do this, Sarah? Once we start, there's no going back." Sarah stood before their evidence wall, where photos, documents, and digital records mapped out years of corruption. She touched a photo of herself from before power suit. Perfect smile, blind to the betrayal approaching. That woman was gone. "We're not just doing this for me," she said, pointing to a section of their wall dedicated to victims. Lisa Martinez, whose AI algorithm was stolen after Michael bankrupted her startup. James Chen, no relation, whose quantum computing patents were seized in a forced buyout. Raj Patel, who lost everything when they copied his security protocols. She turned to her team. "They're not just stealing innovations, they're crushing dreams, making people believe they're worthless." Thomas nodded approvingly. "I've lined up sympathetic journalists at 4 major tech blogs. My analysts are ready to release reports on their fraudulent patents the moment we go public. And I've got our cybersecurity ironclad," Marcus added. "They won't be able to trace anything back to us." Diana studied Sarah's face. "You've thought of everything. But remember, revenge is like radiation therapy. Too much kills the healthy parts of you too." Sarah looked at their wall of evidence, at the faces of lives destroyed by greed and betrayal. "This isn't just revenge," she said quietly. "It's justice. And justice needs to be seen." She picked up Jenny's hard drive, her voice steady. "Let's begin." Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, felt like a parallel universe where time stretched like old gum and dignity came in prison-issued beige. Sarah's cellmate, a former hedge fund manager who'd actually committed her crimes, found it hilarious that the famous lawyer now folded laundry for 20 cents an hour. "At least you're still billing by the hour, honey," she'd joke, but her eyes held a knowing sympathy. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks into her sentence. Michael hadn't even waited for her conviction to be finalized. His attorney, someone she'd shared drinks with at countless firm parties, had attached a post-it note. "Consider accepting the terms. Fighting will only drain what little resources you have left." The terms were brutally simple. She would walk away with nothing from their decade of marriage. Her signature, when she finally gave it, was shaky but deliberate. One more document she'd sign against her will. Prison taught her things Harvard Law never had. How to read people's true intentions in the micro-expressions that crossed their faces. How to sleep through the sound of muffled sobs and midnight arguments. How to swallow pride like bitter medicine and keep moving forward. Her legal knowledge made her popular among inmates seeking appeals advice, but it also painted a target on her back. "Look at the fancy lawyer," a guard would sneer. "Not so fancy anymore." The worst part wasn't the humiliation or the scratchy uniforms or even the tasteless food. It was the letters. Her mother wrote daily, her Chinese characters cramped and desperate, each page stained with invisible tears. Her father's shorter notes came weekly, his English formal and stiff, as if writing to a stranger. But it was the letter from Claire, arriving like a perfectly timed twist of the knife, that nearly broke her. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," Claire wrote on her new law firm's letterhead. "But Michael and I are truly happy. I hope someday you'll understand that sometimes love just happens." The letter ended with news of their engagement. Sarah spent that night staring at the ceiling, memorizing every word, letting them fuel something darker than anger in her heart. Release day came with cruel irony, a bright June morning that seemed to mock her darkness. Her mother waited outside, clutching a bag of civilian clothes like a life preserver. The ankle monitor came next, then the cramped spare room in Queens, where law school diplomas mocked her from dusty boxes. Her father's silence over dinner spoke volumes. This was what rock bottom felt like, not the dramatic crash, but the quiet aftermath. At night, through the thin walls of her childhood home, she'd hear her parents arguing in whispered Mandarin, her mother's fierce defense, her father's wounded pride. She lay awake, listening to her life being debated by the people who'd sacrificed everything to build it. Rock bottom wasn't just her story anymore, it was theirs too. And that realization burned hotter than any prison sentence ever could. 5 years after the day FBI agents had stormed her office, Sarah Chen stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Law School. The students' faces glowed in the light of their laptops, eager to hear from the woman who'd become a legend in corporate law circles. "Everyone expects me to talk about revenge," she began, setting aside her notes, "about how I brought down one of Texas' most corrupt empires. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about resurrection." Her new office at Phoenix Legal occupied the entire 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, the same floor number as her old firm, a coincidence that made her smile. The wall of her corner office held 3 items: her restored law license, the coffee-stained newspaper from Lucky's Diner, and a framed photo of her team. Diana had retired, but still consulted on special cases. Marcus headed their cybersecurity division. Thomas Chen had become their biggest client, his fund specializing in exposing corporate fraud. "The law isn't just about statutes and precedents," she continued, pacing the stage. "It's about truth. Sometimes truth wears a suit and sits in a boardroom. Sometimes it wears a prison uniform and serves coffee. But truth always finds its way to the surface." Her phone buzzed. Another whistleblower seeking help. Since establishing their firm's whistleblower protection program, they'd helped expose 12 major corporate frauds. Each case funded scholarships for young inventors and entrepreneurs, ensuring innovation couldn't be stolen and silenced anymore. "Mom, you're going to be late for the foundation meeting," her assistant called from the doorway. Sarah checked her watch. The Chen Innovation Trust was reviewing new grant applications today. They'd already helped 3 of Michael and Claire's victims rebuild their companies. Michael and Claire's release date was approaching. Their empire had crumbled to dust, their reputations destroyed, their innovations exposed as theft. But Sarah rarely thought about them anymore. She was too busy building something new. "The greatest revenge," she told the students, "isn't destroying what hurt you. It's creating something so meaningful that the hurt becomes just another chapter in a much bigger story." Later that evening, as Sarah packed up her office, Jenny, now the head paralegal, brought in a fresh coffee. The same blend from Lucky's Diner, a tradition they maintained. "Ready to save the world?" Jenny asked, their old morning ritual now a private joke. Sarah smiled, straightening her red blazer, no longer a symbol of loss, but of rebirth. Through her window, Manhattan's lights twinkled like stars, each one perhaps marking another story waiting to be uncovered, another truth waiting to be told. "The world saves itself," she replied, picking up her briefcase. "We just help it remember how." The end asterisk, the signs had been there, Sarah realized later. The way Michael's cologne lingered on Claire's cashmere scarf during their weekly brunches. The mysterious late-night strategy meetings that left her husband's dress shirts carrying a faint trace of her best friend's signature perfume. But Sarah Chen had been too busy breaking glass ceilings at Morrison and Bennett to notice her life's foundation cracking beneath her feet. That Tuesday morning had started like any other. She'd kissed Michael goodbye, his tech startup's latest pitch deck tucked under his arm, his smile carrying a warmth that never reached his eyes. In her office on the 47th floor, she'd been reviewing merger documents when her secretary's face turned ashen. "Sarah, there are federal agents here." The boardroom's heavy doors burst open with choreographed precision. Her colleagues' faces morphed from confusion to shock to carefully crafted distance as FBI agents surrounded the mahogany table. "Sarah Chen," the lead agent announced, his badge catching the morning sun. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. The evidence they presented seemed impossibly thorough. Emails she'd never written bore her digital signature. Offshore accounts she'd never opened contained millions in traced funds. Client documents she'd handled had been altered with surgical precision, creating a perfect trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her door. But it was Michael's reaction that haunted her. As agents led her through the firm's lobby in handcuffs, she caught sight of him near the security desk. He stood beside Claire, her best friend since law school, their fingers intertwined with practiced familiarity. The sight hit harder than the cold metal around her wrists. They weren't shocked or devastated. They were ready, prepared. Claire's Hermes scarf, a gift from Sarah on her last birthday, hung around her neck like a trophy. In the interrogation room, as federal prosecutors laid out their case, the pieces clicked into place. The late nights she'd spent building her career had given them time to construct her downfall. Her own meticulous attention to detail had taught them how to forge her work. The very skills that made her a brilliant lawyer had provided the blueprint for her destruction. "Your husband has already provided a statement," the prosecutor said, sliding across photos of Michael leaving the FBI field office with Claire. "He's being very cooperative about your activities." Sarah stared at her reflection in the two-way mirror, watching as her world burned to ashes around her. She'd spent 15 years building a life that had just been demolished in 15 minutes. But in that moment, as tears threatened to fall, she made a choice. She wouldn't break. Not here. Not in front of them. "I want my lawyer," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She didn't know it then, but this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning.